Welcome to Mr. Beacon, the podcast for location-aware IoT solution designers. My name's Steve Statler of Williot, and earlier this week I had the pleasure of interviewing Aidoo Osei, an IoT strategist, about the state of the Internet of Things. We hope you enjoy. Aidoo, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. I'm glad to be here with you guys.
So we are old friends and colleagues. I invited you on the show because you have recently left a giant in the Internet of Things. So you used to work at Intel, and I think your title was Director of something to do with IoT. Well, can you remind us what it was?
Sure. It was marketing and business development, focused primarily on the low-end roadmap. So basically silicon products and associated ecosystem development for the low power side of things. So not data center, but really the things part of IoT.
And before that, you worked at Qualcomm. We both worked at Qualcomm, and we were both in the strategy group at Qualcomm Retail, where we did a bit of everything, but IoT was in the mix there as well. And so, my reason for inviting you on here, well, A, because you're really smart, and I just always get a lot out of our conversations, and I wanted to share that. But I have this kind of philosophy that you have to talk to people that are working in the business to get an insight into what's going on. But the problem is, when they're actually working for these big companies, they have an agenda. They have to, they have to kind of toe the line and so forth. And you don't work for Intel anymore. You don't work for Qualcomm anymore. You're just Aidoo, and I think it's fair to say you've kind of moved to another role in a very cutting-edge industry, into the payment space, but you're now free to just talk about what you think. And we're not going to ask you to dish the dirt, but I just really wanted the opportunity to catch you when you've just left the Internet of Things ecosystems. You've got a bunch of stuff in your head, and you can just share your thoughts. Sure. That's kind of the premise for this call.
Sure, absolutely. That sounds great. Let's get at it.
I guess the first question that I have to ask you, though, is you've just left a job right at the center of the Internet of Things. Should we interpret this as a vote of no confidence in the Internet of Things?
Not at all. I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate with IoT is it's a massive transformation that's taking place on a number of different fronts. And it's hard to think of any industry right now which isn't in some way being touched or completely transformed by this new trend, which is represented by this moniker called IoT, which means everything and nothing at the same time in some cases. But, I think that it is monumental. I think there's almost no C-level executive that I can think of that doesn't have an IoT strategy in some way, shape, or form. So it's a very real phenomenon. And, I think it represents an opportunity for businesses to either exist into the next era or be taken out.
We shouldn't discount it. And I was at an IoT conference just a few months ago, and they were queuing round the corner. So, that's just one measure of the health of the Internet of Things. And obviously there are other more important measures we'll get onto later. But I got to ask you, what does the Internet of Things mean to you now? And how has that changed over the years as you've kind of moved from role to role and the ecosystem itself has evolved?
Well, I think to put it in the context of Gartner and the hype cycle, it has moved from being a very trendy buzzword to being a very real strategic approach to how businesses will deliver value to their customers in the future. As a result of the very real Moore's Law, which has transformed the cost and the economies of scale achievable for computing connectivity, I think it's entirely likely that we will see continued evolution in dollars being placed into this space. I think corporations are going to continue to spend a lot of R&D dollars. A lot of startups are going to be developing and innovating, putting pressure on incumbents in all types of various sectors. I think the challenge with IoT, and this is where you get an appreciation having been in the business, is it's not entirely clear how you get the return on your investment in the short term for some of these technology innovations. Clearly, we know that there's technology breakthroughs and then there are business model breakthroughs as well, and those two things have to meet up at the right time to get a scalable business out of it. But for those that are not really playing and investing and learning, I think they will be left behind.
So there's a lot of money going into it. Everyone's got a strategy. We're trying to figure out how to make money out of it. But what is it? What is the Internet of Things?
Well, I think it's the intersection of low power, low compute technology that allows things to be connected to the internet in some way, shape, or form. It is the nearly ubiquitous access to processing and data that can be streamed up to the cloud and aggregated to form, in some cases, insights that could transform the way that we do business or the way we live our lives. And most of all, I think there's an opportunity to reconfigure the way that that services and products get delivered to end users, right? And the experience by which users engage with those technologies. So it's a pretty broad set of statements that I just made and somewhat arcane, but there's really an intersection of a lot of different trends that represent IoT. I think the easiest way to think about IoT is in some of the products that have become so popular in recent years. The Amazon Alexa is a perfect example of something that, to deliver a service like that as seamless, as low cost, and with high quality and reliability, 5 or 10 years ago would have been unheard of. You're getting an Alexa experience for under $50 today, and that's just tremendous, right? And the quality of the connection, the responsiveness, the latency, the low latency, all of these things would not have been possible technology-wise, even 5 years ago. A product like that happens when various components and ingredients are made available to very smart people. And then if you can wrap a business model around it, like Amazon has done so wisely, you've got something that could transform not only your living room, but it can transform the way that you interact with everything around you.
So you like what Amazon are doing? That seems clear. I'd love to hear the companies that you think that are big that have got it wrong. That's probably asking a lot of you, because I don't know, you probably don't want to burn those bridges. But I'd love to hear a little bit about, give us kind of in veiled terms what you think the wrong approach is, and then I'm going to give you a chance to say nice things about people. But what are the things, what are just the brain dead things that really big, smart companies with brilliant people in that are doing that? And again, you don't need to name names, although I'd love it if you did. What's going wrong in the IoT?
Well, I think you have some very ambitious companies that have kind of coined the term IoT and smart city and smart. So you have the big guys that got out there early, the IBMs, the Ciscos, the Intels, to some extent, even companies like Microsoft have gotten out there and in some cases have gotten ahead of their skis. Particularly if you think about an area that I used to work in, like smart cities. Mm-hmm. And you go and you get all of these mayors and city leaders and municipal leaders and government agencies really excited about this technology and what can be done with the data and what can be done to improve citizens' lives, but without really understanding the mechanism of how funds are allocated and how these projects would be financed. A lot of these smart city initiatives lead to disappointing implementations, right? And I saw a stat recently that indicated that somewhere around 60% of IoT projects never make it out of the POC stage, right? And to some extent, that's just a function of the fact that we're still learning what to do with this technology. It's kind of technology searching for a problem that people are willing to pay for, right? So when you have really big companies with big professional service staff and they want to kind of sell what they've been selling, for years and years and years to cities or industries, sometimes that's the wrong approach, particularly when you wrap that in a IoT marketing message, right? Yeah. Because in some cases you're missing the overall point in that you really need to deliver value at the end of the day.
Yeah.
right? You got to solve a meaningful problem, and that problem needs to have a market that's big enough to justify the investment.
So yeah, it sounds like part of the problem is everyone thinks IoT is big, and so they get kind of this directive to do some IoT things, and then normal common sense gets suspended, and so they just don't think through user experience, business model, and maybe in some cases you just got to decide you're going to do something, but.
Well, I've always felt, Steve, that there's this tension, and I've spent more time on kind of the industrial IoT side than the consumer IoT side. But I do think there's this tendency to want to have it both ways, which is you want to have it open and interoperable for flexibility and to build the ecosystem, but at the same time you want to own the stack, right? And those two things are hard to do at the same time, number one. And number two, you have the innovator's dilemma, which is, by investing in something that could be very disruptive on one end, you could erode the value of your core business on the other. So, there's a very real risk that big companies take on, which is why I think they go in with a big play to own the term and to own the mind share in this arena so that they can sell the full stack, right?
Yeah.
But I think in some cases it freezes the buyer because the buyer becomes so confused with all of the options that it becomes hard for them to make a big decision.
Yeah, so if you're a GE or any of these big companies, then someone in your strategy group is saying, we need to own this, and they're going to kind of brand a framework, and it's just going to get terribly ambitious. What are the kind of more focused initiatives that you've seen? What are the good things that you've seen? You talked about one, which was Amazon and Alexa, which I'm just addicted to. Any other? What are some other examples?
Well, from a vertical industry perspective, I think the smart energy business is really interesting because you have a very complex problem in terms of how we can be more energy efficient in our buildings and in our homes, how we can make better use of renewables, and how we can do a better job predicting the demand for energy, particularly in states like yours in California, but really globally. And it's a pretty tough, challenging problem, both technology-wise and in terms of human behavior and incenting the right behavior, as well as there's a complex regulatory environment there as well. But I've seen some really interesting and innovative approaches that rely on IoT to get in there and predict and better manage energy usage in the home or in a building, to provide more real-time response to demand management scenarios where you need to actually reduce energy for some event. And there's incentives behind some of this stuff. And there's a real energy economy that exists there. That's real dollars. It's relatively real time. And I see it as being a really good place to invest dollars from both a university research perspective as well as company perspective. It's a slow-moving market, but I think there's some big transformative things to happen in that space.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of opportunities in that, from everything from the smart metering, getting the energy there, to how's it being consumed and so forth.
The timing that Nest Labs had in identifying, and I owned my Nest, and I loved it. Right, and they got it right in that they didn't just focus on the value to the consumer and forget about the value to the utility. They found a way to provide value to multiple sides of the platform that they delivered, and a great user experience around it. So yeah, we got Google with Nest, which I guess they acquired after it was clearly a good thing, and then we've got Amazon with Alexa. Any other specific examples of companies that are doing it right? I think Microsoft. I'm impressed with the turnaround that Microsoft has had under their new CEO. I think anybody who talks about Azure and what you can do with Azure, and how that has become a real contender in the cloud space to AWS. I think they do a good job of kind of providing a service to developers. They understand how to build applications on top of it. I think Windows 10 and what they want to do what used to be called Athens, but the really tiny footprint around Windows 10 I think is interesting. So I think they get IoT, and I like some of the industrial and enterprise solutions that they're putting together.
Nice. So you've spoken to the cloud and you've described some edge user interface technology. One of the elements of this cocktail of what is IoT is these low power wide area network standards, LoRa and so forth. Tell us a little bit about, that seems to be at the core of IoT, would you agree? And what do you think's happening there, and where's that going to go? How important is it?
I think it's, particularly with some of my former employers, LoRa was one of, any low power, wide area, sub-gigahertz type technology is interesting and a bit worrying to some extent, right? Because here you have technology that is delivering great value for how much it costs to implement. And I think even from a total cost of ownership perspective, I think there's studies that say that kind of a LoRa network delivers good value for bursty type applications that are not mission critical. And to some extent, I think some of the other proprietary sub-gigahertz network providers, both in the US and abroad in the UK, are delivering some really good applications around environmental monitoring, some in-building type networks, and they seem to be quite resilient and reliable if you have the right mesh topology deployed on top. What you can do from a battery power perspective is quite impressive relative to what's available on the market from a cellular perspective today. Now, what I think as we move to Cat-M and narrowband IoT, it will be interesting to see what the global carriers do with their plans for the data plans for those types of networks. And I think that eventually you could have a scenario where narrowband IoT heading into 5G could be the death of, like a LoRa, or at least cap the upside growth potential of a LoRa. But that's probably at least a good 4 or 5 years out. And right now, I would imagine that people are probably not waiting to implement their solutions on LoRa.
So just so I understand this, so 5G is coming, whatever that is. Part of it means lots of things, but part of it is an IoT thing, and where you can basically use some of this licensed spectrum for linking sensors over really, the widest area network. And I think what you're saying is the carriers are not just going to sit back and let LoRa work in unlicensed spectrum, and that there's going to be, they're going to, why will they succeed? If I can use LoRa in unlicensed spectrum, I don't have to pay them for a subscription or anything, and I can put up my own gateways and so forth. Why would I not just continue doing that? Why would I go back into the clutches of a Verizon or an AT&T?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, just a classic buyer's decision of how much trouble they want to take on and own themselves, right? Particularly as it relates to things like quality of service. Mm-hmm. If you have to have someone maintain your network and you want to put devices in the field and you want to not touch those devices for 7 years, you want to make sure that you're not relying on a company that may not be here at 7 years to do that. So I think as you start talking about the utilities, as you start talking about smart metering, as you start talking about really global companies that want to deliver, one SKU and have that SKU work regardless of where it's deployed. You don't want to have to be handcuffed by the regional peculiarities of what's happening in the sub-gigahertz space, because you're going to have congestion in some areas. You're going to have the inability for your LoRa network to fully propagate and deliver the data in a timely fashion in some cases. But this is a longer term thing. But I think eventually the cellular technology, if the pricing is right, I think it's going to deliver better quality of service and more reliable for serious applications that get deployed at scale.
Yeah, I'm reminded that it's tough selling to the utilities because they expect this stuff to last a very long time, and the fact that you've got technology that's being obsoleted and companies that are changing hands is kind of scary for those guys that are really deploying.
Yeah, for short-term deployments that are fairly localized, I think it's okay. I mean, you're going to continue to have LoRa be used in a city. If you're localized to a city, and it's okay if the equipment is end of life at the end of 3 years. It's not a big deal. I consider that there would be a place for that type of technology, but I think for anything that requires level of confidence that you're going to get the data at a specific interval, regardless of how much congestion or interference is around, you're going to have to go with more of a license band solution. And assuming that the technology that's been specified by Release 13 gives you the power profile and envelope that's expected, I think that people will eventually decide to continue to move in that direction.
And Release 13, that's kind of basically part of the carrier standard.
GPP, that's right.
Okay. Well, we're going to wind it up a little bit, but I do have a few more questions. And one is, the first kind of really basic question is, do you consider Bluetooth beacon technologies and these sensors as part of IoT?
Absolutely. The way that we've thought about it in the past is there's kind of 3 phases of IoT, right? You've got kind of the phase where you're connecting things that have never been connected to the internet. That's the connectivity piece. Then you've got kind of the smart piece, so it's smart and connected. And then the third phase is really, how do you move to a place where things operate autonomously without the need of human intervention. Mm-hmm. So I think beacons have a place in providing context for either mobile applications or remote applications so that they understand more about their environment and provide proximal services. And the beacons today that we have tend to be fairly simple because the computer in our pocket is so capable, right? I do think there are use cases where beaconing will be deployed within things like outdoor furniture or outdoor lighting to create proximal services for either vehicles or humans. And those use cases, I think, will be pretty interesting. I think we're in the early days for BLE beacons, and we've had some false starts in different industries trying to figure out, is this going to be a retail play? Is it going to be a city advertising play? So there's multiple ways in which this could go, but it's definitely a firm part of IoT.
Aidoo, thanks very much for taking time out of your day. You're definitely one of the smartest people I've worked with in the Qualcomm part of our careers together, which was actually a company full of really smart people. So it's been great to chat with you, and it's
Thanks,
always
Steve.
a pleasure.
Appreciate the invite. Absolutely.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Take care. So, the most important question with all these interviews is, what are the 3 songs that you're going to take to Mars with you, Aidoo?
Well, I happen to have the benefit and the curse of having a dad who's kind of an audiophile.
Oh.
So I grew up with a pretty eclectic taste in music, but most of what I like is kind of old school R&B. So you'll get one selection would be Stevie Wonder. Golden Lady.
Golden Lady, did you say?
That is a classic. Yeah, Stevie Wonder, Golden Lady. That's one I never get tired of.
All right.
Sly and the Family Stone would be another one. Everyday People.
All right.
That's a feel-good tune.
Yeah.
We need more feel-good tunes these days.
We certainly do.
And then I probably would have to go with early 80s hip-hop for the last one, which would be Run DMC.
Okay.
Rockbox.
Rockbox. Okay. Wonderful. And so your dad was an audiophile. Was he in the business, or this was just kind of a hobby of his?
Oh, no, it was a hobby. he had a very extensive vinyl collection, and when hi-fi systems were the rage, and Bose 901s were just came out, and he was just into all this stuff pretty early on. So I constantly had loud music blasting in our house.
Oh, well, that's great.
Really good stuff.
And did it have a last?
Everything from Pink Floyd to Bob Marley to the OJs. So.
A man of good taste. A man of good taste. Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.